Hello and welcome to the Psych Leadership Podcast, the show that helps you understand the psychology of growth, leadership, and making big moves in your life and career. As always, my name's Luke UpChurch, and I'm so happy that you took time out of your day to hang out with me. So where do we start here? First off, thank you for your patience. It's been a couple weeks. I had some things that I needed to take care of outside of psych leadership, actually preparing for this next year's internship opportunities with Rise Up Academics. I'm actually pretty excited about this year. We are launching for the first time a video game internship. We had a lot of students that were asking for video game design and getting that into the internship space. And frankly, the concepts of software development, it's not a long walk to get us into video game design, right? Similar concepts, different audience, different outcome, but at its core, fundamentally, very similar. So in any case, that's what I've been doing for the past couple weeks. So I appreciate you. Hopefully you got some time to reflect on what we've talked about, and maybe that makes today's episode have just a little bit more punch. So I don't know, maybe fortuitous timing, right? So today is the season finale for season 3. It's incredible to me that you guys have been with me this long. We've been at this now, I guess it's been about 2 years. This September technically will be 2 years, so we're right on the cusp of it. In that time, we've got airplay in over 72 countries, and I'm absolutely blessed. And I hope that, hopefully this is something that you want to continue. In that space, by the way, I did recently transition over to Spotify. So I was doing Buzzsprout as my primary recording platform, and then I would disperse that out through Spotify, Apple, basically all the different podcast homes. So I'm hitting you, reaching you wherever you normally go to get your podcast. While Buzzsprout has an excellent platform, and I strongly recommend it to anybody trying to get into this space, all the bells and whistles aren't free. So ultimately, I had to transition that over to Spotify. Where that benefits you a little bit, you can still get the podcast wherever you normally get it, so hopefully there was no disruption there. But on Spotify specifically, they have a better platform for interactions. So if you have comments, questions, anything that you want to do to help me kind of steer the ship, I would greatly appreciate that. And frankly, some of you were leaving comments on that platform. I wasn't really looking there because I was using Buzzsprout. So I apologize if you reached out and I didn't get back to you in a timely manner. Totally not intentional, just me learning the business. And in this case, me not realizing that Spotify even had that functionality. So again, I apologize if I left you hanging, but going forward, that's a great place to interact. I also watch the comments out on there on YouTube. So again, another method for you if you choose to take advantage of that. So why don't we jump into the episode? Like I said, today is the season 3 finale. And before we get into that, I want to kind of build the framework here a little bit. If you've been listening since episode 42, we've actually been building something this whole time. It may not have felt like it week to week, but I was laying the foundation for today's conversation. We talked about leading without a title, boundaries that build respect, stopping the habit of asking permission. We unpacked the concept of the perception gap, who you are outside of your title, managing energy rather than just managing your time, and how to ask for feedback that is actually useful. And then we close that out with how to have the hard conversation that you've been avoiding. It was 9 episodes, 9 tools. Each one of those stands completely on their own, and each one of them hopefully taught you something real that you can use. What I haven't said out loud yet is that the whole reason for those episodes in that sequence is that none of these 9 tools were really meant to live by themselves. They were always part of one system, just viewed from 9 different angles. So today we're going to do 3 things. First, we're going to walk back through every single episode. We're not going to go super deep, okay? So if you didn't hear those, I'm going to give you the highlights today. Go back and listen to those. That's the beauty of a podcast, right? You can always go back. Those episodes aren't going anywhere, so go back, listen to those, refer a friend, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to go through all those episodes in order just to get them percolating in your memory a little bit. Next, the second thing we're going to do is show you how they actually connect. Again, 9 separate ideas. They actually fall into 4 themes, and they work together in somewhat of a loop. So there's no sequencing. They just ultimately, you want all 4 of those firing. The third thing we're going to do before we close out the season, I'm going to give you some direct challenges, something that I'd actually like you to do so that this isn't just something you know, but something that you enact. So why does the framework fail without integration? Let's start just honest talk here, folks. Most people consume content, podcasts, books, whatever. They collect those frameworks the way that they would collect books, right? You've seen you know the folks, the book dragons that have this huge bookshelf, and clearly none of the books have actually been read. None of them are dog-eared. They're just sitting there like a dragon collecting treasures, right? Lots of good ideas. They're scattered everywhere, and they're not actually put into use. And the research on learning transfer backs this up. Knowledge that isn't organized into something usable ends up decaying fast. No matter how good of an idea it was when you initially heard it, if we don't put it into some sort of practice, it's just background noise, folks. So here's the promise for today. I'm not introducing anything new. We're going to talk about those 9 tools built over the last several episodes here, and I'm going to help you understand how they're one system. And by doing this, I really want to shape this whole thing into something that you can sequence and use together. All right, so let's talk about those 9 episodes. The first one that we really dove into was trust being a superpower. And this was the foundation on which everything else sits. Trust is our base layer. Without it, none of the other tools really work. So if you take nothing from this in terms of sequencing, this is the one that has to exist. But it's also a race that you will never win. There is never a finish line. You're constantly building that trust and reinforcing the foundation, or you're doing something stupid to erode the foundation, right? There's never a point where you can put a bow on that and say, trust is done, right? Check the box, move on. No. Always going to be a thing, okay? You can have perfect boundaries and perfect self-awareness. You'll still go nowhere if nobody trusts you. So that's why it came first. The second thing we talked about was the idea of leading without a title. What I shared in that episode, titles are cheap, influence is earned. If you want to know what I'm talking about there, just go out to LinkedIn, just for grins. And this is an area that I would encourage you to consider leveraging AI a little bit. If you put in your basic job description, what do you do today? Not copy and paste from when you applied. Just give AI a few bullet points. This is what I do today, and ask it to give you a range of titles that fit that general that general workload. Make sure that you put in there things like how many direct reports you have, how long you've been with the company, things like that. And if your experience is anything like mine, I plugged that in there, and the range that it came back was anything from titles that were like manager or lead, all the way up to senior director and even VP, right? So when I say titles are cheap, that's what I mean. They're not the same. They're not consistent, even within the same company. You and I could be doing the exact same job at the same company in completely different departments and have 2 totally different titles, right? Sometimes though that title has an illusion of power, right? Just because somebody has a VP in their title, I used to tell myself when I was coming up through the ranks, well, so-and-so is a director, so-and-so is a VP, they must know what the hell they're doing. Listen, folks, they're figuring out same as you. That's not to say that they don't have some experience or some education or something backing them up. I'm just saying that agnostic of title, I don't care if they've got doctor to their name, VP, whatever, they still put on their pants one leg at a time, right? So titles are cheap, influence is earned. Once you have trust, you can lead from anywhere in the org chart. You don't need permission. You don't need a promotion to start being a leader. This is where you learned to that waiting for the title is optional, and that's the piece that again I hope that lands well with everybody. I hear so many people that'll say, well, that's above my pay grade, that's not my job. Bullshit. If you want it, go for it. If you're waiting for somebody to dub you as huzzah, you're now a leader, you're probably waiting on something that's never going to happen. The third thing that we talked about was a concept I called RICE. All right. And this isn't something you're going to find in any textbook. This is something I kind of made up in the moment. But it's around boundaries that build respect. So it's reciprocity, investment versus drain, consistency of the ask, and explicitness of the expectations, RICE, right? The moment you start leading without a title, some environments will try to give you more than they give back, right? So they're going to dump responsibility on you. They don't necessarily back that with more pay. So RICE is an audit that basically helps you draw that line, right? There's nothing wrong with pushing past your title. Again, I don't want you to get in that mindset of I was hired to do X, and if you ask me to do Y, that's above my pay grade, and then immediately put your hand out. I can't imagine, or I can't tell you how many times I've come across folks, and this isn't a knock against millennials or anything. I'm just saying that folks that maybe don't have the world experience or don't have that grit, it seems like they're so beholden to that title and that initial job description, and you ask them to do anything more and they clinch up and they stick that hand out there so quick. Well, that's more responsibility. Where's the money? If you want to move up, if you want to be the leader that you are meant to be, some of that does come with a little bit of quid pro quo, right? A little bit of back and forth. Yes, you are going to take on additional responsibilities. That's going to happen. However, I still want you to run that through the RICE process, right? Is there reciprocity in it? Is this an investment in my growth, or is this just taking advantage of me? Is this consistent? Right? If I'm always asked to stay late, if I'm always asked to do more, and it's not an exception to the rule, well, then at some point we might need to reevaluate. That doesn't mean that it's not an investment. It doesn't mean that there's not reciprocity there. It just means that it's happening often enough that this isn't a favor. This is now the expectation, right? And then the explicitness of the expectation, right? As soon as it becomes, this is now part of your job, regardless of where you started, this is where you are now, that's when it becomes okay to start pushing a little bit, to say, does it make sense to now reevaluate my title or my pay, my situation, because what was extra is now considered expected. The fourth thing that we discussed was the swag. Right? So stop asking permission. The sophisticated wild-ass guess says, what do I know? What's my best first move? And what is my adjustment trigger? So often I see folks, especially new to a company, new to a role, they are so worried about making a mistake that they never try, right? If I just sit there and all the good ideas without action is kind of like worrying about something, right? It gives you something to do, but it doesn't actually get you anywhere. So take a swag at it. This tool is actually designed to, the model there actually gets you moving once the boundaries are set. Because a boundary without action just becomes smaller, safer versions of standing still. The fifth thing that we talked about was the perception gap. So once you're moving and taking swags, you need to know how you're landing, right? There's a 4-question self-audit that we talked about in that episode, and the external feedback checklist exists to close the gap between how you see yourself and how the room experiences you. Confidence without calibration becomes arrogance. Calibration without confidence is invisibility. We then pivoted into the identity audit. Know who you are, agnostic of your job title. What do you value when no one's watching? What do you do that has nothing to do with your career? Who would you be if your title disappeared tomorrow? This gives you a fixed point that calibration in episode 5 actually requires. So to close that perception gap, you can't close that, right, if you don't have a stable measurement in the first place. So that identity audit is something really important. I'll give you an easy example from my career. Outside of my day job, I get the chance to work with veterans. I get the chance to work with students. That's the stuff that I would do if my title disappeared. I was talking to a friend of mine just a couple weeks ago, and he said, you're not all that far off in the grand scheme of things. You're not that far off from retirement, which, by the way, was kind of scary to me. It's one thing to be called old. It's another thing to realize that it's not wrong. But so he said, what would you do if you retired tomorrow? If money wasn't an object and you could just dive into your passion. And I think what he expected me to say is that I would go on vacation. I would go travel the world, do something wild. And my immediate answer with zero hesitation was that I would invest all my time into Rise Up Academics. When you talk about my identity outside of my job title, don't get me wrong. I am blessed to do what I do. It allows me the time to sit here and record podcasts for you all. It allows me the time to invest into Rise Up Academics. But in terms of where I get my energy, I absolutely know that is working with students. And frankly, if we valued teachers in this country the way that we should, that'd probably be my full-time job. I have no doubt in my mind that I would pivot to something like that. But what about you? Know who you are without the title. The seventh thing that we talked about was know, protect, restore. This is managing your energy. So once your identity is stable, the next thing that constrains is capacity. Know your patterns across the 4 energy dimensions, protect your peak hours, restore deliberately. This is the fuel system underneath everything else on the list. Okay, so this is another one. If you recall, I talked about knowing everybody has a different circadian rhythm. Some folks have more energy in the morning, some maybe afternoon, some maybe evening. For me, I know that my brain is firing on all cylinders earlier in the day. I tease folks that I need a cup of coffee before I'm willing to hear them talk. Part of that is because my mind is on all cylinders. My patience is not, right? But that goes back to that, knowing yourself a little bit. But again, make sure that you are protecting your energy, not just your time. The 8th thing that we talked about was the 5 principles of feedback framework. So anchor to a specific situation, ask about the impact, not the intent, and give explicit permission for the hard answer. Ask one question at a time, close the loop out loud. This is how you get better once the foundation is in place. So again, if you don't have trust, and if you haven't done the legwork to know who you are, to kind of grow in that emotional maturity, then the feedback is just going to be taken the wrong way. In fact, I was just recently reading this article. It talked about the idea that during the mid-year review, same feedback from the same manager ends up landing differently depending on where the receiver is emotionally, mentally at the time of the feedback, right? If you're already having a crap week and I pile on top of it, even if it was well-intended, you might not mentally be in the right place to hear it. And so in that article, we talk about the idea that as a leader, you need to understand where your team is and decide, is today the day for this message? Are they mentally prepared to hear this message in such a way that they can react appropriately? And I'd challenge you to think on the same thing, right? Don't ask for feedback when you've already been having a shitty day, right? Do you think that you're actually going to hear what they have to say, or are you going to take it personally? All right. The ninth thing was avoidance. We were basically going from avoidance to repair, right? Difficult conversations. How do you recognize that amygdala hijack? Reappraise instead of, or reappraise instead of just reacting. Open with the gap between the expected and the observed. Repair quickly if it gets tense. This is the tool that lets everything else on this list actually get spoken out loud to another human being, because none of these frameworks matter if you can't have the conversation and put them into practice. So now, how do we go from these 9 tools into one system? This is the part I really want you to sit with. Those 9 things, they actually fall into 4 categories. And they run together. This is in a loop. So again, there really isn't a sequence. If you were going to have a sequence, I guess, some people need to think about it that way. I would start with the first category, the foundation, right? This is your trust and your identity audit. These two answer the question, who am I? And what do people actually believe about me? Everything else depends on this layer being solid, right? You have to know who you are and have some trust. The next 3, I'd say that I guess there is a little bit of an order to these, but we'll get to that later. The next one is fuel. Okay, so we have foundation, then we have fuel. Fuel is the know, protect, restore. This answers, do I have the capacity to execute on this thing? Without fuel, we're just, it's all gassed up and no place to go, right? Without fuel, the perfect foundation produces nothing. You've got foundation, you've got fuel. Next is action. This is where we get into that leading without a title, the rice, the swag. This answers, how do I actually move? And how do I know when to push versus when to hold back? This is where momentum gets created and ultimately protected. And then finally, it's that calibration piece, right? The perception gap, the feedback framework, and the difficult conversations. This answers, how do I know if any of this is actually working? And how do I course correct out loud with other people? This is the feedback mechanism for the whole system. And here's the part that matters the most. The foundation without fuel burns out. Fuel without action, just going to stagnate, right? You've got the energy, but nothing coming out of that energy. Action without calibration just comes off as arrogance, recklessness, maybe both. Calibration without foundation has nothing stable to calibrate against in the first place. So this system really only works in a loop. And it really isn't a checklist, but something I want you to run. So how do we run this, right? Luke, how do I actually put this into practice so that I'm not just a podcast dragon collecting information that I'm not actually using? So what I would recommend, I'd actually break this down. So weekly, run a quick no check. Are your energy patterns holding up? Run one feedback. Ask the 5 principle framework questions with someone specific, and notice if there's a conversation that you're avoiding. You don't have to have it yet, but just name it. Okay, so every week, take that step. Monthly, I want you to run the 4-question perception gap. Self-audit. After something significant happens, run the rice check on anything that's starting to feel like it's draining more than it's building towards something. Okay, so any new task. And take at least one swag on something that you've been waiting permission to do. Quarterly, I want you to revisit that identity audit. Has your answer to who would I be without a title gotten richer, gotten thinner? Right? And take an honest look at whether you've had the hard conversations that needed to happen or whether they've started piling up somewhere. The point isn't perfect adherence to a calendar, right? So I've given you weekly, monthly, quarterly. you don't have to necessarily adhere to a calendar strictly. The point here is that growth that doesn't get revisited deliberately tends to fall apart. It decays, right? A system that you run on a rhythm beats 9 good ideas you heard once on a podcast and never touched again, right? It takes you away from just something that you heard and didn't utilize and actually moves forward. So as we close out this season, don't try to run all these things tomorrow. I just want you to start out simple. Just pick one. Think about where you are, where you perceive yourself to be within that continuum, and maybe start there. And I'd really encourage you to get into that rhythm before season 4 starts, because where we're going to pick up in season 4, we've built this framework so far of being a leader, of getting out of your own way, understanding who you are, and how do you step into that space. Season 4 is really going to be about the juxtaposition, right? You finally made it. You are now a leader, whether by title or having direct reports or whatever, you've moved into that space. So if you're not there yet, that's fine. Set a reminder on your calendar, come back. Okay. Again, this podcast isn't going anywhere. So, it'll be there when you're ready for it. If you need to go back and listen to those previous episodes, take the time to do that, okay? But before season 4 starts, think about where you're at on this continuum and what you're going to put into play right now, okay? All right, and let's see. One more thing before we wrap up the season. Everything that we've covered this year in some way something that I wish somebody had told me early in career. If it landed with you, consider passing one piece of it forward to an intern, to a peer, to someone that is just earlier in their career than you are. You don't need a title to mentor somebody, the same way you don't need one to lead. You just have to be willing to say the thing that would have been helpful to you. All right, folks. So that's it. That's the season. Thank you for being here. And not just for today's episode, but for the whole season. Again, season 4 is coming, so hopefully you're there for it. Again, if you have any questions, comments, please reach out to me on the Spotify platform. That's the easiest place for me to get your comments and react to those. Again, you can help me steer the ship. All right, folks, have yourself a great day, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.